Hey, this is Dr. Glenn Livingston, author of Never Binge Again, and you are listening to Annie Talks. Keep listening.
Annie Talks, Annie Talks. Welcome to the show. Here we go with Annie Talks. Annie Talks, Annie Talks. Welcome to the show. Here's the host, it's Annie Talks.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Annie Talks, where we bring to you interesting stories about interesting people that you want to know about. I'm your host, Annie Rivera. Thank you for tuning in, and to those who have already subscribed. If you're new to the podcast, welcome, and I hope you enjoy what you hear, and if so, I personally invite you to subscribe. Annie Talks is brought to you by Daily Gadgets and More. Daily Gadgets and More is proud and committed to offering the largest variety of high-quality products at the lowest prices and the best customer service. Find us on Instagram or visit dailygadgetsandmore.com. That's dailygadgetsandmore.com. My guest on this episode of Annie Talks is Dr. Glenn Livingston, a veteran psychologist, CEO, and author of the book titled Never Binge Again, Stop Overeating and Binge Eating and Reprogram Yourself to Think Like a Permanently Thin Person on the Food Plan of Your Choice. Dr. Livingston spent several decades researching the nature of binging and overeating via work with his own patients and a self-funded research program with more than 40,000 participants. He shares his own personal journey out of obesity and food prison to a normal, healthy weight and a much more lighthearted relationship with food. Here now is my conversation with Dr. Glenn Livingston. Dr. Livingston, thank you so much for being on the show. I really, truly appreciate it.
I've been looking forward to this all week.
Yay, thank you so much. So let's dive right in. Can you give a sense of your background? Why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners and let us know who Dr. Livingston is?
Okay. Well, I suppose what's most important for you to know is that I'm not just a psychologist who decided to work with binge eating. I'm someone who had a serious problem myself. I actually come from a family of 17 therapists, psychologists, social workers, counselors, MSWs, and the standing joke in my family is that if something breaks in the house, we all know how to ask it how it feels and nobody knows how to fix it. That's my upbringing, and I always remember when I was 4 years old, I heard my dad on the radio, and I ran and I said, Mommy, why is Daddy on the radio? She said, well, he's a psychologist. And I said, what's that? And she said, well, he makes people happy when they're sad. And I said, why is he on the radio? And she said, because he wants to make more people happy when they're sad. And I said, I want to do that. So,
awesome. So you followed in his footsteps. That's lovely.
I did. A little differently, but I did.
Yeah. Awesome. Now, tell us, where hometown, where are you from? Where?
I grew up in Great Neck, Long Island. I was born in Washington, D.C. My dad was a captain in the Army, but we moved to Great Neck fairly quickly thereafter. Okay. I spent 39 years in and around the New York City area. Then I moved to New Hampshire, just north of Boston. And then after I got divorced a couple of years ago, I moved to Portland, Oregon.
Got it. So now I was reading on your bio, I know that you've spent decades researching the nature of binging and overeating, which is the topic that we're going to be talking about here. And you yourself have experienced your own personal journey out of obesity and what you call food prison to a normal, healthy weight and a much more lighthearted relationship with food. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And why do you feel people have food addictions or have food issues?
Well, let me tell
that was
you,
a loaded question.
It's a loaded question, and I have very strong feelings about it, and it might not be what you think I'm going to answer.
Okay.
But let me tell you more about my own story first. So when I was about 17, I discovered something interesting. I'm 6'4", and I'm reasonably muscular. And if I worked out, I discovered, for 2.5 or 3 hours a day, I could really eat whatever I wanted to. I could have, a pizza or two
Mm-hmm.
I could have boxes of muffins. I could have 6 chocolate bars and a whole bunch of lattes. I could eat whatever I wanted to. And it didn't seem like a problem. I thought it was more like a superpower, like Doug Graham says.
Mm-hmm.
And that worked for me, other than the fact that I was spending an awful lot of time eating and an awful lot of time working out that I could have been spending doing other more productive things. It really worked for me until I was married. I was married about 22 years old and in graduate school. And I had to commute 2 hours in each direction to go to graduate school. And I had patients and, I had a wife who wanted to spend time with me. And I just couldn't work out for 2.5 or 3 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
But I found that I couldn't stop eating. I was still eating 6,000, 7,000, sometimes even 10,000 calories a day.
Wow.
And I just kept getting fatter. And my triglycerides went through the roof. I mean, I have a test that says there were 826, but I remember them being over 1,100. And I remember conversations with doctors where they said I was likely going to die in my 30s if I kept going this way. And still, I couldn't stop eating. I was sitting with suicidal patients.
Mm.
That's something you have to be very, very present for.
Right.
But my mind was on when I could get to the deli or the pizza place or the supermarket.
Oh, wow.
And luckily, I never lost anybody. But, being a psychologist has always been first and foremost really important to me.
Mm-hmm.
So being from a family like mine, I went on the theory that it's probably not what I'm eating, but what's eating me. So I looked for every psychological solution you could possibly find. I went to see some of the best doctors in the New York City area, and you could imagine that I knew them given the family that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Overeaters Anonymous for a couple of years, and I took medication for a little while. And things helped a little bit. I learned things about myself. It was a soulful journey, but nothing really fixed the problem, and it actually kind of kept getting worse.
Mm.
Somewhere in my 30s, I said to myself that I don't have kids and I never commuted. I always worked at home. So I had an awful lot of time to develop a career. And I did a lot of consulting for big companies like big food, big pharma. I'm a little embarrassed about having done that now, but I made a lot of money and I was paid an awful lot to do these giant studies. And I said to myself, well, maybe I should run one for myself. So I ran a study over the course of about 5 years, and I got 40,000 people to take a survey on the internet. Mm-hmm. And the survey was all about the foods that they had trouble stopping eating once they started, and different areas of life satisfaction and wellness. And I looked for correlations, and I found a couple of interesting patterns. One pattern, which really applied to me, was that people who started their binges with chocolate, and my binges usually started with chocolate bars, mm-hmm. they tended to be lonely or brokenhearted. And I thought, okay, I was not in the world's best marriage, and it made sense I was a little lonely and brokenhearted. Mm-hmm. People who struggled with crunchy, salty things like pretzels and chips, they tended to be stressed at work. And people who struggled with chewy, soft things tended to be stressed at home.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, that's really interesting. So now if I know what people binge on, I have a really good idea of what the problems are in their life, and I could just solve those problems. Why don't I start with myself? Mm. So I went to my mom, who's also a therapist, and I said, Mom, I struggle with chocolate. You do too. And I'm, in not the world's best marriage, and I'm a little lonely and brokenhearted. That makes sense. But where could this have all started? Is there anything in my upbringing you can tell me about that would have set up a pattern that I run to chocolate if I was lonely or upset? And my mom got this really horrible look on her face. And she said, I'm so sorry, honey. And I said, Mom, what is it? And she said, well, when you were a little boy, when you were about 1 year old, my father had just got out of prison. And I was devastated. I had idolized him my whole life, and I didn't know he was doing these things. And I was just devastated and depressed. And so sometimes I was just sitting and staring at the wall. And on top of that, your father, my husband, was a captain in the Army, and they were talking about sending him to Vietnam. And I was terrified. Mm-hmm. So I felt like my whole world was falling apart. And when you would come running to me for food or even just a hug or some love, I didn't have the wherewithal to give it to you all the time. Sometimes I did, but not all the time. I didn't have it.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did is I put a refrigerator on the floor and I filled it with chocolate Bosco syrup. A big bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup was always there. And I say, Glenn, go get your Bosco. And you'd go crawling over to the refrigerator on the floor and you'd take out the Bosco and you'd suck on the bottle and go into a chocolate sugar coma. And so, and if this were the movies, that would seem like the piercing insight, right? If this were the movies, Mom and I would have a big hug, we would have a big cry, and I would never have trouble with chocolate again.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had a hug and a cry. This was via Skype, so it was virtual. And I did forgive myself and forgave my mom, and I learned all kinds of things about her at that point. It led to a whole interesting conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a good conversation to have. But the actual chocolate problem got worse.
Okay.
The reason it got worse was because I discovered there's this little voice in my head that justified things. And it went something like this. You know, Glenn, you're right. Your mama didn't love you enough, and she left a big chocolate-sized hole in your heart. And until you can find the love of your life, you're going to have to go right on binging on chocolate. Let's go get some now. Yippee.
Mm.
And
Okay.
what I learned from that, and then subsequently started to put this together with what I'd learned as a bit of an insider doing consulting for Big Food. What I learned from that is that once these patterns are struck, once the match is struck and you start overdoing it with some of these foods, they have a life of their own. And it doesn't matter so much what started the fire. What matters is how do you contain the fire and how do you put it out?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been spending all of these years trying to figure out why. Why do I overeat? What's wrong with me? How was I raised? What emotional conflict am I going to resolve to fix this? And I learned a lot of interesting things. It was a soulful journey, but the food problem just got worse and worse while I was asking why.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I had to start asking how. How do I stop this?
Okay.
So around the same time, I was researching some alternative addiction treatment literature, mostly in the area of drugs and alcohol. And I came across a guy named Jack Trimpey at Rational Recovery. And I always tell people, if you struggle with drugs and alcohol, don't use my system, use his, because he's got 20 years of perfecting it for black and white addictions.
Right.
Black and white addiction is something you can give up entirely, and as opposed to food where you have to take the line around the block a couple of times every day. So I was researching that, and he really was pointing out that overcoming an addiction is really not like nurturing your wounded inner child. The seat of addiction is the lizard brain, and the lizard brain needs to be dominated, not loved. It's kind of like your bladder.
Mm-hmm.
You know, your bladder generates a very powerful biological urge, but you have to take control and say, well, we're only going to express this in a particular way at a particular time. And you have to be dominant no matter how strong that urge is.
Mm.
So I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So I can't be loving myself then. Then I went back to what I knew about neurology, and I realized that the lizard brain evaluates something in the environment. If it sees something new in the environment, all it thinks is eat, mate, or kill. Do I eat it? Do I mate with it, or do I kill it? There's no love there.
Mm.
There's no concern for spirituality or music or art or tribe or family or relationships. There's no concern for your longer term plans or weight loss and health and fitness goals. It's just eat, mate, or kill.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, oh, okay, this is what's going on, because I know that these big corporations are putting billions of dollars into engineering these hyper-palatable food-like substances. It's like concentrations of starch and sugar and fat and oil and excitotoxins that are all engineered to hit your bliss point without necessarily giving you the nutrition that you need to feel satisfied, so you just come back for more and more and more.
Mm.
And then they put all this money into packaging to make it appear to be healthy. I actually remember a VP of a major food bar manufacturer telling me that the pivotal, profitable insight was when they decided to take the vitamins out of the bar and put the money into the packaging to make it look healthy instead.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they created a vibrancy of color which I'm sure their research scientists know signals a diversity of nutrients to the primitive brain. Like the reason that we want a salad which is filled with a diversity of color, like the purple cabbage and the yellow carrots and the dark green leafy vegetables. And the reason we want that is because that signals a diversity of nutrition that's available. In fact, that's probably why we appreciate color in the first place.
Okay.
So it's perfectly legal for them to spend billions of dollars to make things look healthy as opposed to be healthy. And then the advertising industry, beams 7,000 messages at us a year about food, and maybe a half a dozen of them are about whole fruits and vegetables. So we're constantly being programmed to eat these things. And then if you look at the animal studies about what happens if you short circuit the pleasure machinery of our brains, like if you put an electrode in a rat's brain, for example, in the pleasure center, and you wire that electrode to a lever that rat can self-stimulate, they'll forget about their survival needs and they'll just push the button thousands of times per day. A starving rat will ignore food and push the button thousands of times a day. A nursing mother rat will ignore her pups and push that button thousands of times per day. Rats will crawl over painful electrical grids to push that button thousands of times per day. And these studies have been replicated in higher mammals, and I think lately even humans. Now, I don't think that I don't think anybody's putting electrodes in our brains. I'm not a paranoid person. But is it really a far stretch to say that we're being given pleasure buttons to self-stimulate when you can walk out of a McDonald's and there's another McDonald's across the street? And that's the level to which we've gotten in our country with the availability of these fast food-like substances. So I said, okay. So it's not that I've got some psychological problem or that I'm diseased or there's something genetically wrong with me that I can't stop overeating. And I even confirmed that there aren't studies that proves it's a disease. You'll be told that it's a disease by the addiction treatment industry, but it's really not backed by any kind of scientific evidence. It's just more palatable for a lot of people to believe that that's the case, but it's not really the case. I don't think that we have a disease. I think that we have healthy appetites that have been corrupted by industry. And so then I tried to figure out, well, what's the solution? And I really got the piercing insight from Jack Trimpey and how he was working with drugs and alcohol. Because he would say you have to make a line, you have to draw a very bright line and say, I'll never drink again or something like that. And so that that any voice in your head that suggests that you will drink again is coming from your lizard brain. Well, so I said, okay, so I need to do something similar with food. I know it's going to be different because you have to eat. I can't just stop eating. I can't say I'll never eat again. But I would say something like, I will never have chocolate Monday through Saturday again. I'll only ever have chocolate again on Sundays.
Okay.
Now here's the embarrassing part. I decided that my inner lizard brain, I was going to call it my pig.
Okay.
I never thought I was going to publish this. This was just my way of getting better. So I said, that's my pig. My inner lizard brain is my pig. If I see chocolate during the week, then chocolate is pig slop other than a Sunday. And any thought in my head whatsoever that says it's okay to have chocolate Monday through Saturday, that's pig squeal. And I don't eat pig slop, and I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. And as crazy as that sounds, after it was literally 30 years of struggling, doing all this in-depth psychological studying and soul searching and paying probably millions of dollars over the years for therapists and doctors. What saved me, not as a miracle, but slowly but surely, was to say, I don't eat pig slop and I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. That very, very primitive statement. and it would wake me up. At the moment of impulse, I'd get those extra microseconds to decide, who am I and what do I want to do around this food? And slowly but surely, I made more rules and I kind of developed a whole system about it. And I kept a journal for 8 years, me versus my pig. And as kind of a coincidence, as I was getting divorced, I was part of a minor publishing company. And the CEO said they wanted to publish a book themselves to prove that they knew what they were doing. And I figured it was going to languish in some dark corner of Amazon. So I said, okay, because I was kind of embarrassed to be public about this. But it didn't. It became the #1 book for eating disorders and weight loss and weight management on the Kindle, the free side anyway. And now it's 600,000 copies later, and we organized the whole business around, I don't eat pig slop, and I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. So,
And by that, you're talking about the book, which is the Never Binge Again. Is that what that is?
Never Binge Again is the book, yeah.
Okay. Never Binge Again, Reprogram Yourself to Think Like a Permanent Thin Person. I have a couple questions. So let's say somebody who's like, an avid, who's on a weight loss program, they're on a healthy eating regimen. They go to the gym, 4 or 5 days a week. And then you mentioned something about, telling yourself Monday through Friday, I don't eat pig slop, or you don't equate eating chocolate during that time.
I had a rule, yeah.
Okay, so then what about those cheat days where you do allow yourself? Is that healthy? It could be anybody else's chocolate. It could be me, chips, or it could be, me, French fries, or whatever it be. My chocolate is your chocolate is my chips or my French fries.
Yep.
When do you allow yourself to have that cheat day, or how do you reprogram yourself to not have those cheat days, or can you have those cheat days?
Well, the answer is yes to all of them.
Okay,
but. I will say that there are some people, I actually happen to be one of them. I use that as an example because people get a little scared if I say that I never eat chocolate.
Right.
But while originally I said I don't have chocolate Monday through Saturday, eventually I personally realized that never was a lot easier than sometimes for me. And so I just never eat chocolate. I won't ever eat it again. It's been years.
Okay.
I just never do. But a lot of people can. And here's the thing. Willpower, it turns out, there's a lot of research on this lately, it's not a black and white thing that some people have and some people don't.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like gas in the tank, and we know what fuels that tank and we know what wears it down. What burns the gas is decision making, not just about food, any kind of decision. People have trouble resisting marshmallows if you offer it to them after you made them do math problems, because they had to make too many decisions. It's really interesting.
Funny. Uh-huh.
So, and this is why it's very difficult for people to eat well at night, even if they were very good and committed during the day, because they've made too many decisions across the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so, since you only want to make rules that protect you and don't unnecessarily restrict your freedom, often I will have people try to come up with what we call conditional rules to manage something like chocolate or chips in a way that they don't have to give it up entirely if they really like it.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is that you could say, I'll never have chocolate Monday through Saturday, and then you'll usually define some parameters for how much chocolate you could have on a Sunday. So, I'll have up to 2 ounces of dark chocolate on a Sunday, but maybe not 2 Sundays in a row or something like that. It's different for every person.
So you're setting parameters. You're setting some sort of, you're not only conditioning yourself, but you're also allowing yourself, giving yourself permission if you wanted to.
Yeah, okay. You are. And the reason that works is that it eliminates decisions. It's kind of like aiming at an archery target. And if on Monday through Saturday you're aiming at the bullseye, you know exactly where the bullseye starts and ends because there's a very clear line around it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, where does the second rung begin and end? So you want to define very specific parameters. 2 ounces of dark chocolate, no more than 2 Sundays per calendar month, whatever it is for you.
Mm-hmm.
This applies to exceptions for restaurants. Like maybe I never eat bread except for 2 pieces at a restaurant meal with a friend. It applies to all sorts of things where you can remove the decision making from the impulsive environment. That can really help. The other way to think of it that really helps to make it permanent is to make it part of your identity, because character really trumps willpower. If you really adopt this as a rule, if you say, I will never eat chocolate Monday through Saturday again,
mm-hmm.
what you're really ultimately saying, see, if I ask people, could they never have chocolate Monday through Saturday again? They'll say, no, that's crazy. I couldn't do that. I feel too deprived. But if I change the phrasing and I say, could you become the kind of person who doesn't eat chocolate during the week? They go, wait, maybe I could do that. Because we make character commitments all the time without knowing it. So I'll give you an example. Suppose you walk into a diner and there's a $20 bill on the table because the waitress hasn't seen her tip.
Right.
And she says, I'll be right back. I have to get you a menu. And there's no video camera and there's no window. And there's nobody up front and nobody would see you take the $20 bill. 99% of the people that I ask in that situation tell me that they wouldn't take the $20 bill, even though they'd never get caught and it would better their situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, why? And they say, well, that money doesn't belong to me. I'm not a thief. And I say, so as a matter of character, because of the kind of person you are, even though nobody would find out, there's just some things you'd never do.
Right.
And they go, oh, okay, so I can do that with food also. And I say, yeah.
I hope you're enjoying this podcast episode. We'll be right back after this short message from one of our sponsors. Comfotherm thermal wraps are designed to help relieve the pain and swelling in and around the jaw, especially after wisdom teeth extractions. For more information, visit comfotherm.com. That's comfotherm.com. Hey there, Annie Rivera here. Thanks for tuning in to Annie Talks. Be sure to tell your friends about subscribing to the podcast, and don't forget to rate and review the podcast. Doing so helps out with the algorithm and helps others to find this podcast too. I also invite you to like my Annie Talks Facebook page. There you'll find other news, information, upcoming events, and all sorts of things. Stay in the know with Annie Talks. I also invite you to join the Annie Talks Community Facebook group, where we carry the conversation from the podcast episode to the Facebook group. Ask questions about the episode, about a guest, about the locations, you name it. Ask away. This forum is for you. See you on the Annie Talks Community Facebook group. In some cases, what if you're not at that mindset yet? What if you haven't discovered that about your character yet? What if it's just you're just emotionally eating it, or emotionally eating because you are going through a depression, you are going through some sort of emotional or anxiety or whatever it may be. But what if they haven't come to that realization yet, and they're that's not built into their character? I'm not saying that about the money. I'm saying that about food in terms of like what if this is the norm? What if that's, how you were, if this is part of who you are, your culture, or whatever it may be, and that it's a contributing factor to maybe the weight gain or overeating. But if you haven't come to that realization yet, then how do you know to stop it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I ask people to think about the single biggest food problem they have in their life and how they might like to improve it. And most people know what that is. Now, emotional eating is a funny concept. I've got a lot of compassion for emotional eating. I certainly felt like I was eating for emotional reasons all these years.
Mm-hmm.
And see, it's very true that if you overload your body with stuff that doesn't really belong in there. I mean, we didn't have chocolate bars in the savannah. It's an unnatural concentration of sugar and caffeine and theobromine and fat and all types of things that really. I'm not saying that it couldn't be a lovely thing for people that don't get carried away with it, but it's a supersized stimulus. It's a concentration of pleasure that doesn't really exist in nature, and it corresponds to some of those pleasure buttons that starts to have a life of their own.
Mm-hmm.
So when you put that through your system, it does change your chemistry, and it does make it harder for the nervous system to conduct the emotions that are bothering you. But there is a mistaken notion in the culture that we're eating to numb out or to comfort ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And while there is an analgesic effect of the slop of overeating in some ways when you feel emotionally, you'll get away from the emotions. What also happens is you get high with food. You're getting high with the food, and so it's more like a drug addiction than just eating comfort food. And I find that when people recognize that, it becomes harder for them to continue to overeat in emotional situations. The other thing I'll tell you is that like I'll give you a hug if you need a hug. I'm not trying to be a cold-hearted bastard. No, really. I mean, I'm people who know me say I'm a really nurturing guy, but I don't have a lot of compassion for what your inner lizard brain is doing to you, and how it's, because if you have 6 problems and then you overeat, if you have 6 emotional problems and you overeat, then you have 7 problems, because now you have to recover from whatever
right.
And so it doesn't really make sense. It's not a logical solution. And if you're willing to consider the change, if you're willing to tell your inner pig, and you don't have to call it a pig, you can call it your food monster, or people call it if you tell your inner food monster that, listen, you've been torturing me for years, and now it's payback time. I'm willing to undergo any level of emotional discomfort without binging. So, like, life is not a pain-free experience. Who says that I have to get away from these feelings? What if I just hurt? What if I was just angry? What if I was just anxious? Is that really going to kill me? Feelings aren't facts. I know you say it's going to kill me. I know you say that life is going to be torture forever if we don't have this, particular food to get away from it. But will it really? Are those feelings really facts? So there's that. And you can think about the kind of commitments that people make, and whether, like, if you put it in a different context. So let's say that you and I are about to get married, and I say to you, Annie, I'm 99% sure that I'm not going to sleep with anybody else, but what if I get really emotional? What if I get really emotional and I just need the comfort?
Right.
See what I mean? So the nature of a commitment is, it's a commitment of character, it's a commitment of purpose, and you don't have to make it if you don't want to. I think we fought wars in this country for freedom, and I'm a staunch supporter of your right to eat whatever you want to eat, and I'm not going to tell you what to eat. I'm not going to take anything away from you. But I don't think people know what they're depriving themselves of. People listen to their inner pig saying, well, you can't give up chocolate because you're going to be deprived forever, and you're going to be miserable, and you're going to be, so unlike everybody else. But what are you depriving yourself of by continuing to have chocolate? What about, your ability to fit in the clothes that you want to? What about your ability to stop worrying about cardiovascular risk or diabetes? And what about your ability to feel confident walking in the world as an independent, thin, attractive person? What about your ability to run around and play with your kids and enjoy time with your husband? And what about all that? And anyway, did I answer your questions?
I think so. So I want to talk about the title of your book. I'm going to jump down to that. I know it's Never Binge Again, and it's Never Binge Again, Reprogram Yourself to Think Like a Permanent Thin Person. So the word thin kind of stuck out to me a little bit. So I wonder why that was used in this in your title. But why thin? My thing is, why thin? Why is thin being glamorized here? And because there are so many organizations out there telling people it's okay to be who you are, no matter the size of the weight. I know some commercials that are out there saying, love yourself. But your title says Never Binge Again, and how to think, or reprogramming yourself to think like a permanent thin person. So now we're kind of bringing that back into like, okay, thin is in, or, I'm someone who looks in the mirror and says, okay, I'm not thin. So I'm just curious as to, how does that play into someone who's maybe having an issue, struggling with their weight? And
well, okay. And in some ways, I think this might be a valid criticism, and I might need to find another way to phrase the title. But in other ways, I think that it's important to not swing the pendulum too far the other way.
Sure.
So if you look at the face of any previously obese person, you'll generally see shame, even if they've conquered their addictions. You still see shame on their face. If you look at my face, someone else who's been through this will see that. They'll understand it. And I think that is a function of the over-glamorization of a Barbie doll kind of body, or a supermodel kind of body, or Calvin Klein kind of body.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the case, and I think that we do need to work on our society to eliminate fat shaming. I think it's important that people can accept
Right.
themselves where they are and participate in the world. And look, some women have bodies that are more womanly than others, and virtually nobody looks like Cindy Crawford or Jennifer Aniston.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in some ways that's a valid criticism, and I might need to rethink that. In other ways, I'm not sure that the scientific data really supports the idea that being overweight is okay.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And the data that I've seen suggests that in some ways being even a little overweight can seriously increase your risk of diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and like even erectile dysfunction.
Right.
So I think that it's possible in our effort to promote health at any size. I think it's possible that we can swing the pendulum too far the other way and start ignoring what the data is actually telling us. So I'd like to make it a less emotional issue and just more of an empirical issue. And if you're,
Mm-hmm.
if your blood levels are okay, and your markers are showing that you're prone for longevity, they like people to start accepting themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't tell people how thin they should be.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They choose their own goals. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the times when I work with people, I remember this one woman, I worked with her for a couple of months, and we never actually talked about her specific weight. And she was so upset that she couldn't get down to her goal weight. And finally I said, well, what's your goal weight? And she told me it was like 125 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like 5'6" or something. And I said, well, what do you weigh now? She said 131. And I thought the whole time I was working with her that she was 100 pounds overweight. And I thought she didn't want to tell me how much she weighed because she must be 100 pounds overweight. And I broke out laughing. It wasn't very professional of me, but I broke out laughing. And I said, honey, it's okay. You don't have to be 125 pounds. Take it easy on yourself.
Well, that brings up a good point, because I thank you for sharing that. When I went to the doctor, I went for a well woman visit years ago. I want to say maybe 5-6 years ago, and even with my doctor, and heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes is very, runs in our family. It's hereditary and all that. And my father passed away 2 years ago of cancer, but he also was struggling with.
I'm sorry.
And thank you. He was also struggling with and going through all treatments of diabetes and high blood pressure and all that. So, and during my well woman visit, my doctor did tell me, for my size, my stature, and, I'm 5 feet. And I weighed my heaviest. I was about almost 190 pounds, and I wore size 18. So when she told me then, you're like you're going to have an early demise if you don't start to take your health and your health seriously here. So the very next day, cold turkey, she says, I think you should, I don't know how much weight to tell you to lose, but you do need to do something with your health, with your weight. Otherwise you will have this early demise. And the very next day I was crying. I went into the gym. I went to Cal State Fullerton at the time, and we had free membership because you're a student, right? So I would go into the gym. I had no idea what I was going to do. I just knew that I needed to do something quick because, I want to be around for my children. I want to be able to run around and keep up with them. It kind of made me take a hard look at myself. Can I be around for a little while? Well, I can if I take my health seriously, because I was on, I thought, a road to destruction, because I don't know if that I was binge eating, but I was definitely not eating my healthiest at all. And it clearly showed. So I quickly started the regimen, and in that year alone, I lost 55 pounds in 1 year. So I was able to keep it and maintain it all these years. And I'm an advocate for health and fitness, but throughout these last few years, it's not so much about, I threw out the window, so what society believed to be the norm, the physical norm. You have to be this, you have to be that. No, I got tired of listening to that. Now I feel my healthiest. I know I'm definitely under 190 pounds. I'm about 130-ish, 135. For 5 feet, it's still a little bit, I guess it's still a little bit over my, above what I need to be. But I do feel so much more healthier. I think if, like you said, if you're going to reprogram yourself to think, like a quote unquote, you fill the blank thin person,
should be a permanently healthy person.
There you go. I think that would be, I think that's kind of the mindset that we all should adopt, right? More or less, because I did, like you, I had an emotional binge eating. I love chocolate, I love chips, I love all that, and that's because when I was bringing up my kids, we weren't financially well off. We were, I struggled. So whatever I could afford, and half the time that's what I could afford was, all the junk food, or, so that's something that I kind of had to take into consideration. I had to reassess myself and say, this is not happening. This is not healthy, and I need to be around for my kids. So I changed all that. So I think, like you said, if we can start thinking, reprogramming ourselves to think more permanently like a healthy person, that should help us turn the tables, right? So we should start to think, to start to live a little bit more healthier life.
Randy, I really appreciate this talk. Mm-hmm. You really helped me think through something that I think is going to make a difference. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I appreciate this. I mean, because I didn't, I know, so I'm a layman, right? So I don't really know the technical terms between, the studies, and I had no idea about the lizard brain. So that's totally new to me. So, but it's definitely intrigued me, but it has made me think a little bit more about, why people eat the way they do. I see it. And even people closest to me, I see, some of the struggles they go through, and they tend to lean toward food to, help them get through some of the emotional or anxiety or stresses that they go through. And I can see that. But, now having to maybe reprogram yourself to think otherwise, and I think will make them start to look at themselves or look at food a little bit more healthier. I have a daughter who's taking nutrition as her major in class in college, and she every day that I see her and I pick her up for school, I ask her, "What'd you guys make today?" or "What'd you guys do today?" And she tells me, "Unbelievable! I had no idea the kind of stuff that you could do with food and how you can eat healthier." And I'm a vegetarian, and I had no idea the kind of food that's out there that could, that's satiating, it's all new to me.
Tell me what your favorite dish is. I'm always curious. I'm a vegan, so trust me.
Are you? Okay. So I just had, what did I have the other day? Well, for me, I'm a vegetarian, but I do eat fish. So sure. I'll eat seafood. So I am I love tuna. But I definitely love, I love all the Greek food. I love Thai spices. So anything, and when she brings home stuff from class, and she says, "Mom, you should try this. We made this," and she tells me how she prepared it. It's absolutely yummy. So I'm open to any types of food or any kinds of cultural foods. I love them all, but I love Thai food. And I definitely love salads. So,
Thai food has such interesting spices. That's true.
I love it. And yeah. I think if we start to think a little bit more healthier, and why, when we were talking earlier, what came to my mind was, eat to live rather than the live to eat. Mm-hmm. And I've kind of adopted that as my own mantra. So I definitely want to eat to live so I can be around for my children. And I mean, they're older, they're 28, 23, 22, 22, but when they have grandkids one day, or when I have grandkids one day, I want to be able to see them. So I have to be able to eat to live.
The thing that people don't recognize is that your pleasure centers adjust. So if you have a chocolate bar every day, an apple doesn't taste that good.
Yeah.
There's a phenomenon called downregulation. So it's kind of like in graduate school, I slept underneath the subway, and I couldn't imagine how I was ever going to get sleep the first time I was there.
Hmm.
But then 5 days later, I just didn't hear the subway. And what happened was my nervous system downregulated. It just doesn't respond to it anymore. And so with sugar, what tends to happen is that people start to feel not only like that's the only pleasure in life, but that they need the sugar to even feel normal. Like their system is downregulated so much that if they don't have sugar one day, they think that they're just going to feel tortured and it's going to be like that forever. But the phenomena works in reverse too. Mm-hmm. If you stop having a chocolate bar every day and you have an apple instead, in the course of a month or two, your taste buds, I think they double in sensitivity and your pleasure centers start to respond much more to the apple. And so 6 months later, an apple is going to taste more delicious to you than the chocolate bar ever did.
Right.
But people can't believe that. You're not supposed to believe me right now when every bone in your body says, hand over the chocolate and nobody gets hurt. You're just supposed to try it.
Yeah. I love that. Well, you've changed my my thinking a bunch here. So I definitely am taking into consideration about, okay, why am I really, binging on this chocolate bar today? Because I tend to lean toward that sometimes when I'm having an emotional day. So it's definitely giving me something to kind of think about.
Well, and you're entitled to emotional relief.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You need to be compassionate towards yourself, but maybe being compassionate means more like journaling or talking to a friend or going for a run, or even just sitting down and crying. Sometimes just sitting down and crying and letting the feeling pass through you, mm-hmm. telling yourself the only way out is through. Sometimes that's the most self-nurturing you can be. So I don't mean to say you're not entitled to that emotional relief. I just don't think that the chocolate is going to help you with that.
Sure. Understood. Well, Dr. Livingston, where can we find your book?
I can actually get you a free copy if you go over to neverbingeagain.com and click on the big red free bonus button. There's a big red button at the site.
Awesome.
And when you do that, you can get the Kindle Nook or PDF book for free. Mm-hmm. You could also go over to the paid versions if you prefer, if you want the paperback or the Audible version. Okay. And can I just tell them 2 more things they'll get for free when they do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've also prepared a set of food plan starter templates. So regardless of what dietary philosophy you have, whether it's low carb or high carb or point counting or calorie counting or vegetarian or paleo, whatever it is, we prepared a set of starter rules that might let you see how people who have your philosophy work. And then because this is a really weird idea in theory, it sounds like, I heard this crazy psychologist today who says he's got a pig inside him, and it sounds kind of crazy. I recorded a bunch of sessions so you can hear that it's a compassionate theory in application. And you can also hear how people who felt desperate and felt hopeless can turn around their thinking in just 1 session or so. So I wanted you to hear that. So that's all free if you go to neverbingeagain.com and click on the big red free bonus section.
And then for our listeners, what parting words of wisdom can you share with them? And what takeaway do you want listeners to know?
Some people are frightened of creating a rule that would be incorporating a discipline. And I want you to know that when I say never, like I will never have chocolate again, that I'm presenting it to my inner pig the same way that I would talk to a 2-year-old who was crossing the street. I would say, little Sarah, I had a 2-year-old niece named Sarah. I said, you can't ever, ever, ever cross the street without holding my hand. Never, ever, ever, ever. Mm-hmm. Even though I know in 5 years, that little girl's going to grow up and I can show her how to look both ways.
Sure.
The reason that I say never is because she's not capable of entertaining the impulse. She'd be too impulsive at 2 years old and it would be very dangerous. Mm-hmm. Our lizard brains are like that. We have to present these rules to them as if they're set in stone, but you can change them whenever you want to. You don't have to be frightened of the word never and always. You just, you step back and you write about it for a half hour, an hour, figure out why, figure out specifically what rule you want to change, and then give it 24 to 48 hours before you let it take effect so you know you're not doing it impulsively. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be frightened of the word never. And it turns out that, Annie, what I want people to understand is that freedom sits on top of discipline. Discipline doesn't restrict freedom. The fact that you are disciplined enough to know what to do at a red light, what to do at a stop sign, what to do at a yield sign, makes it possible for you to freely drive around the city. If people didn't discipline themselves to stop at red lights and stop signs and yield at yield signs, then nobody could get in the car and drive where they wanted to go. They wouldn't have that freedom, and our locus of locomotion would be a radius of locomotion would be much smaller. A jazz musician who has practiced their scales repeatedly can only express their soul because they've done so. It's very rare that people just sit down and play. They have to understand the structure of music, and they have to have practiced the scales, even if that's so they can know when they have left that structure and how to get back to it if they need to. Discipline creates freedom. It's only the discipline of the engineers who worked it out so that when you turn the steering wheel of your car by 30 degrees to the right, that the actual wheels of your car turn 30 degrees to the right. It's only because of their discipline that you're free to drive wherever you want to drive, that you can express your wishes. Freedom sits on top of discipline. Discipline doesn't inhibit freedom. So like Jim Rohn says, a life of discipline is better than a life of regret. Choose one discipline, one rule, and implement it to the best of your ability, and listen to your inner food monster or your inner pig try to get you to break it, and just ignore it.
Great. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And where can we follow you? Do you have social media? Besides your website, where can we follow you?
Well, there are links to all of my social media on the website. I have a readers forum at neverbingeagainforum.com. We also have a podcast at neverbingeagainpodcast.com. But if you just go through neverbingeagain.com at the reader bonus site, and you'll get led to everything.
Perfect. So I will have all that information down below in the show notes, so everybody check that out. Dr. Livingston, thank you so much for being on the show. I truly appreciate it. It was very insightful and lots of information that I know that some of our listeners will have, would love to just be able to, take a look and listen and follow as well.
Thank you for the time.
Absolutely. Well, that's it, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Annie Talks and learning about food and the relationship with food from Dr. Glenn Livingston. Don't forget to check out his website, neverbingeagain.com, and follow him on social media. I will have all that information in the show notes below, so be sure to check them out. Now, before you go, if you haven't already subscribed to the Annie Talks podcast, I invite you to hit subscribe and be notified anytime we upload a new episode. If you could also rate and review my podcast, it would surely help me out, and it will help others to find this podcast too. You can also follow Annie Talks on social media. I will have all the social media links down below in the show notes as well. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and keep listening to Annie Talks.
This is Dr. Glenn Livingston from Never Binge Again. You're listening to Annie Talks Radio. Please keep listening.